Hi, good morning. Welcome to Ikate's Crossing. Okay, so with my morning cuppa here, let's take a little sip and let's have a look at the Sacred Path cards to start with as we continue our 10th insight reading into that. So let's take a sip of tea. Elderflower and apple, absolutely gorgeous. And I really should have put a cloth down before I did that. I've got to keep it on my table. Right, so let's have a look. What card are we going to choose today? Right, let's choose a card here. Let's use. And what card are we going to focus on today? Oh, there it is. It jumped out. The one we have is the West Shield with introspection and goals. So that's the card for today. Yeah. So let's have a read. What card number was that? 10. Okay, West Shield. Power of woman to seek answers. Place of bear's cave. In the fading light of grandfather's sun, the horizon of tomorrow brings the strength to meet my goals. West Shield, introspection and goals. So let's have a look at the application. Because I'm not going to go into all the teaching. I think it's too many pages. If the West Shield has appeared, Bear is asking you to look at your present goals and discern how they affect your future. Are the answers you seek from your own inner knowing? If not, it may be time to enter the silence. Digest the questions so that your personal answers can emerge. Bear also reminds us that the West Shield is the place of all tomorrows. If you're afraid of the unknown, it may be time to clear away the fear. Strength to accomplish this clearing is Bear's greatest medicine. Call on Bear and feel the courage to meet the future. Fill your spirit. In all cases, the West Shield speaks of the ability to complete our goals, the acknowledgement of our inner strengths, and the power to find and know our own answers. Remember that the opinions of others become mixed with our own doubts and become limitations when we forget to enter the silence. Oh, what a great card. Oh, that's a good thought for today, a good reflection, something to think about. Okay, as we read, opening to the knowledge. Damn, I thought, lying flat on the rock, the coarse surface of the stone edging into my back. I was back at the stream again. For a long moment I stared up at the grey sky, now threatening rain, listening to the water flow past me. I raised up on one elbow and looked around, noticing immediately that my body felt heavy and fatigued, just as it had in the last time I was in the other dimension. Clumsily I got to my feet, a slight pain throbbing in my ankle, and limped back into the forest. I uncovered my pack and prepared some food, moving very slowly without thinking. Even as I ate, my mind remained surprisingly blank, like after a long meditation. Then slowly I began to increase my energy, taking several deep breaths and holding them. Suddenly I could hear the hum again. As I listened, another image came to mind. I was walking east in the direction of the sound, in search of its cause. The thought terrified me, and I felt the old urge to flee. Instantly the hum vanished, and I heard a rustling of leaves to my rear. I jerked around and saw Maya. "Do you always show up at the right time?" I stammered. "Show up? Are you crazy? I've been looking for you everywhere around here. Where did you come from?" "I was down by the stream." "No, you weren't. I've been down looking for you." She stared at me for a moment, then glanced at my foot. "How's that ankle?" I managed to smile. "It's fine. Listen, I've got to talk to you about something. I have to speak with you too. There's something very strange happening. One of the Forest Service agents saw me walking into the town last night, and I told him about your situation. He seemed to want to keep it quiet, and he insisted on sending a truck to get you this morning. I told him your general location. He made me promise to ride out here with him this morning. Something about the way he was talking felt so odd, I decided to hike up ahead of him instead. But he'll probably be here any minute." "Then we need to go," I said, scrambling to pack. "Wait a minute, tell me what is happening." She looked panicked. I stopped and faced her. "Someone, I don't know who it is doing some kind of experiment or something like that here in the valley. I think my friend Charlene is involved somehow, or maybe in danger. Someone in the Forest Service must have secretly approved this. She stared, trying to take it all in. I picked up my pack and took her hand. Walk with me for a while, please. There's more I need to tell you. She nodded and grabbed her pack, and as we walked east along the edge of the stream, I told her the whole story, from meeting David and Will to seeing William's life review and listening to Joel. When I came to the part about her birth vision, I moved over to some rocks and sat down. She leaned against a tree to my right. You're involved in this too, I said. Obviously, you already know that your life was supposed to be about introducing alternative techniques of healing, but there's more than you intended to do. You're supposed to be part of this group that William saw coming together. How do you know all this? That Will and I saw your birth vision. She shook her head and closed her eyes. Maya, each of us comes here with a vision of how our lives can be, what we want to do. The intuitions we have, the dreams and coincidences, they're all designed to keep us on the right path, to bring back our memory of how we want our lives to unfold. And what else did I want to do? I don't know exactly, I couldn't get it, but it had something to do with this collective fear that is rising in human consciousness. The experiment is a result of this fear. Maya, you intended to use what you've learned about physical healing to help resolve what's happening in this valley. You must remember. She stopped and looked away. Oh no, you can't put that kind of responsibility on me. I don't remember any of this. I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing as a doctor. I hate this kind of intrigue, understand? I hate it. I finally have the clinic set up just as I want. You can't expect me to get involved in all this. You've got the wrong person. I looked at her, trying to think of something else to say. During the silence, I heard the hum again. Can you hear that sound, Maya? A dissonance in the air. A hum. That's the experiment. It's happening right now. Try to hear it. She listened for a moment and then said, I don't hear anything. I grabbed her arm. Try to raise your energy. She pulled away. I don't hear a hum. I took a breath. Okay. I'm sorry. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not supposed to happen this way. She looked at me for a moment. I know someone with the sheriff's department. I'll try to get in touch with him for you. That's all I can do. I don't know if that will help, I said. Apparently not everyone can hear the sound. Do you want me to call him? Yes, but tell him to investigate independently. I'm not sure he can trust everyone in the Forest Service. I picked up my pack again. I hope you understand, she said. I just can't be involved in this. I feel as though something horrible would happen. But that's just because of what happened when you tried this before, in the 19th century here in this valley. Can you remember any of that? She closed her eyes again, not wanting to listen. I suddenly saw a clear image of myself in buckskins running up a hill, pulling a pack horse. It was the same vision I had seen before. The mountain man was me. As the vision continued, I made my way up to the top of the hill, then paused to glance back to my rear. From there I could see the falls and the gorge on the other side. There was Maya and the Indian and the young congressional aide. As before, the battle was just beginning. Anxiety swept over me, and I pulled at the horse and walked on, unable to help them avoid their fate. I shook off the images. It's okay, I said, giving up. I know how you feel. Maya walked closer. Here's some extra water and food I brought. What are you planning to do? I'm going to head towards the east for at least a while. I know Charlene was going in that direction. She looked at my foot. Are you sure your ankle will hold up? I moved closer and said, I haven't really thanked you for what you did. My ankle will be fine. I think just a little sore. I guess I'll never know how bad it might have been. When it happens this way, no one ever does. I nodded and picked up my pack and headed east, glancing back once at Maya. She looked guilty for an instant, then an expression of relief swept across her face. I walked towards the sound of the hum, keeping the stream in sight to my left, pausing only to rest my foot. About noon, the sound ceased, so I stopped to eat lunch and assess the situation. My ankle was swelling slightly, and I rested for an hour and a half before resuming my journey. After covering only another mile, fatigue overwhelmed me, and I rested again. By mid-afternoon, I was looking for a place to camp. I'd been walking through thick woods that grew right to the edge of the stream, but ahead the landscape opened up in a series of gently rolling foothills covered with old growth forests, 300- and 400-year-old trees. Through a break in the limbs, I could see a large ridge rising towards the southeast, perhaps another mile away. I spotted a small grassy knoll near the top of the first hill, which looked like a perfect place to spend the night. As I approached, movement in the trees caught my eye. I slipped behind a large outcropping and looked. What was that? A deer? A person? I waited for several minutes, then carefully moved away towards the north. As I inched along, I saw a large man 100 yards to the south of the knoll I'd seen before, apparently setting up a camp himself, staying very low to the ground and moving with skill. He definitely raised a small tent and camouflaged in with the branches. For an instant I thought it might be David, but his movements were different, and he was too big. Then I lost sight of him. After waiting for several more minutes, I decided to move further to the north until I was completely out of sight. I'd been moving no more than 5 minutes when the man suddenly stepped out in front of me. "Who are you?" he asked. I told him my name and decided to be open. "I'm trying to find a friend." "It's dangerous out here," he said. "I would recommend you go back. This is all private property." "Why are you out here?" I asked. He was silent, staring. Then I remembered what David told me. "Are you Curtis Weber?" I inquired. He looked at me for a moment longer, then abruptly smiled. You know David Lone Eagle." "I only talked to him briefly, but he told me you were out here, and to tell you he was coming into the valley, and that he would find you." Curtis nodded and looked towards his camp. "Getting late, and we need to get out of sight. Let's go up to my tent. You can spend the night up there." I followed him down a slope and up into a deep cover of the larger trees. While I pitched my tent, he fired up his camp stove for coffee and opened a can of tuna. I contributed a package of bread Meyer had given me. "You mentioned that you were looking for someone," Curtis said. "Who?" Briefly, I told him about Charlene's disappearance and that David had seen her hiking into the valley. Also, that I thought she had been seen coming in this direction. I didn't talk about what had occurred in the other dimension, but I did mention hearing the hum and seeing the vehicles. "The hum," he responded, "comes from an energy generating device. Someone's experimenting with it here for some reason. I can confirm that much, but I don't know whether the experiment is being conducted by some secret government agency or a private group. Most of the Forest Service agents seem to be unaware that it's happening, but I don't know about the administrators." "Have you gone to the media?" I asked, "or the local authorities about this?" "Not yet. The fact that not everyone hears the hum is a real problem." He looked out at the valley. "If I just knew where they were. Counting the private land in the national forest, there are tens and thousands of acres where they might be. I think they want to conduct the experiment and get out before anyone knows what happened. That is, if they can avoid a tragedy." "What do you mean?" "They could totally ruin this place, make it into a twilight zone, another Bermuda Triangle where the laws of physics are in an unpredictable flux." He looked directly at me. "The things they know how to do are incredible. Most people have no idea of the complexity of electromagnetic phenomena. In the latest superstring theories, for instance, one has to assume this radiation emanates across 9 dimensions just to make the math work. This device has the potential to disrupt those dimensions. It could trigger massive earthquakes or even a complete physical disintegration of certain areas." "How do you know all this?" I asked. His face fell. "Because in the decade of the 80s, I helped develop some of this technology. I was employed with a multinational corporation I thought was named Deltec, although later, after I was fired, I found out that Deltec was a fictitious name. You've heard of Nikola Tesla? Well, we expanded many of his theories and tied some of his discoveries to other technologies the company supplied. The funny thing is that this technology is composed of several dissimilar parts, but basically it works this way. Imagine that the electromagnetic field of the Earth is a giant battery that can provide plenty of electrical energy if you can tie into it in the correct way. For that, you combine a room temperature superconductive generator system with a very complicated electronic feedback inhibitor with mathematically enhances certain static output resonance. Then you tie several of these in a series, amplifying and generating the charge. And when you get the collaborations exact, presto, you have a virtually free energy right out of the immediate space. You need a small amount of power to start, perhaps a single photocell or a battery, but then it's self-perpetuating. A device the size of a heat pump could power several houses, even a small factory. However, there are 2 problems. First, collaborating these mini generators is unbelievably complicated. We had access to some of the largest computers in existence and couldn't do it. Second, we discovered that when we tried to increase the total output beyond this relatively small size of enlarging the mass displacement, the space around the generator became very unstable and began to warp. We didn't know it then, but we were tapping into the energy of another dimension, and strange things began to happen. Once we made the whole generator disappear, exactly like what had happened in the Philadelphia experiment. Do you think they really made a ship disappear and show up again in a new location in 1943? Of course they did. There's a lot of smart technology around, and thus secret technology around, and thus smart. In our case, they were able to shut our team down in less than a month and fire all of us without a breach of security because each team was working on an isolated part of technology. Not that I wondered how much about it then. I mostly bought the idea that the obstacles were just too great to proceed, so I thought it was a dead-end research. Although I did hear that several of the old employees were hired again by another company. He looked thoughtful for a moment, then continued. I knew I wanted to do something else anyway. I'm a consultant now, working with small technology firms, providing advice for improving their research efficiency and use of resources and disposal of waste, that sort of thing. And the more I work with them, the more I'm convinced the insights are having an effect on the economy. The way we do business is shifting. But I figured we had to work with traditional power sources for a long time. I hadn't thought about the energy experiments in years until I moved into this area. You can imagine how shocked I was to walk into this valley and hear the same sound, this characteristic hum. Then I heard every day for years when we were working on the project. Someone has continued the research, and judging from the resonances, they're much further along than we were. Afterwards, I tried to contact two people who could verify the sound and maybe go to the EPA or a congressional committee with me. But I found out one had been deceased for 10 years, and the other, my best friend when I was on the corporation, was also dead. He had a heart attack just yesterday. His voice trailed off. Since then, he went on, I've been out here listening, trying to figure out why they're in this valley. Ordinarily, one would expect this kind of experiment to be done in the laboratory somewhere. I mean, why not? Its energy source is space itself, and that's everywhere. But then it dawned on me, they must think they're very close to perfecting the collaborations, which mean they're working on the amplification problem. I think they're trying to tie into the energy vortices in this valley and attempt to stabilize the process. A wave of anger crossed his face, which is crazy and totally unnecessary. If they really can find the collaborations, then there's no reason not to utilize the technology in small units. In fact, that's the perfect way of using it. What they're trying now is fun insane. I know enough to see the dangers. I'm telling you, they could totally wreck this valley or worse. They focus this thing on the interdimensional pathways. Who knows what might happen? He stopped suddenly. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you heard of the insights? I stared for a moment and then said, Curtis, I have to tell you what I've been experiencing in this valley. You may find it unbelievable. He nodded and then listened patiently as I described, meeting Will and exploring parts of the other dimension. When I came to the life review, I asked, this friend of yours who recently died, was his name Williams? That's right, Dr. Williams. How'd you know that? We saw him reach the other dimensions after his death. We watched as he experienced the life review. He appeared shaken. That's hard for me to believe. I know the insights, at least intellectually, and I believe in the probable existence of other dimensions. But as a scientist, the ninth insight stuff is just much harder to take literally. The idea of being able to communicate with people after death. You're saying that Dr. Williams is still alive in the sense that his personality is intact? Yes, and he was thinking about you. He looked at me intently as I continued to tell him about William's realization that Curtis and he were supposed to be involved in resolving the fear and stopping this experiment. I don't understand, he said. What did he mean when he talked about a growing fear? I don't know exactly. It has to do with a certain percentage of the population refusing to believe that a new spiritual awareness is emerging. Instead, they think human civilization is degenerating. This is creating a polarization of opinion and belief. Human culture can't continue to evolve until the polarization is ended. I was hoping that you might remember something about it. He looked at me blankly. I don't know anything about a polarization, but I am going to stop this experiment. His face grew angry again, and he looked away. Williams seemed to understand the process for stopping it. I said, well, we'll never know now, will we? As he said that, I fleetingly saw again the image of Curtis and Williams talking on the grassy hilltop, surrounded by several large trees. Curtis served our food, still appearing upset, and we finished eating in silence. Later, as I stretched out and leaned against a small hickory, I glanced up at the hill at the grassy knoll above us. 4 or 5 huge oaks made almost a perfect semicircle on its crest. Why didn't you camp up on the hill? I asked Curtis, pointing. I don't know, he said. The idea came to me, but I guess I thought it was too exposed or maybe too powerful. It's called Cotter's Knoll. Do you want to walk up there? I nodded and rose to my feet. A grey twilight was descending across the forest, commenting on the beauty of the trees and shrubs as we walked. Curtis led the way up the slope. At the top, in spite of the fading light, we could see almost a quarter of a mile toward the north and east. In the latter direction, a near full moon was rising above the tree line. Better sit down, Curtis advised. We don't want to be seen. For a long while we sat in silence, admiring the view and feeling the energy. Curtis took a flashlight out of his pocket and laid it on the ground beside him. I was memorized by the colours of the fall foliage. Presently Curtis looked over me and asked, "Do you smell something, smoke?" I immediately looked out at the woods, suspecting a forest fire, and sniffed the air. No, I don't think so. Something about Curtis' demeanour was shifting the mood, introducing a feeling of sadness or nostalgia. What kind of smoke do you mean? Cigar smoke. In the glowing moonlight I could tell he was smiling, reflectively thinking about something. Then suddenly I began to smell the smoke. What is that? I asked, looking around again. He caught my eye. Dr. Williams smoked cigars that smelled just like that. I can't believe he's gone. As we talked, the smell subsided and I dismissed the whole experience, content to stare out at the sage and the large oak beside us. In that moment I realized that this was the very spot where Williams saw himself meeting with Curtis. It was to take place right here. Seconds later I observed a figure forming just beyond the trees. Do you see anything out there? I quietly asked Curtis, pointing in that direction. As soon as I spoke, the form disappeared. Curtis was straining to see. What? I didn't see anything. I didn't respond. Intuitively. Somehow I began to intuitively receive knowledge, exactly as I'd received it from the soul groups, except the connection was more distant and garbled. I could sense something about the energy experiment, a confirmation of Curtis's suspicions. The experimenters were indeed attempting to focus on the dimensional vortexes. I just remembered, Curtis said abruptly. One of the devices Dr. William was working on years ago was a remote focus, a dish projection system. I bet that's what they're using to focus on the openings. But how do they know where the openings are? I immediately perceived an answer. Someone of a higher awareness pointed them out until they learnt the spatial variances as they showed up in the remote focus computer. I had no idea what that meant. There's only one way, Curtis said. They would have to find someone to point them out, someone who could sense these higher energy locations. Then they could map out an energy profile of the site and focus precisely by scanning with a focus beam. Probably the individual wouldn't even know what they were doing. He shook his head. These people are vicious. There's no doubt about it. How could they do this? As if in response I sensed other knowledge that was too vague to understand completely, but seemed to maintain that there was, in fact, a reason. But we had to first understand the fear and how to overcome it. When I looked at Curtis, he seemed to be deep in thought. Finally, he said to me and looked at me and said, I wish I knew why this fear is coming up now. During a transition in culture, I said, old certainties and views begin to break down and evolve into new traditions, causing anxiety in the short run. At the same time that some people are waking up and sustaining an inner connection of love that sustains them and allows them to evolve more rapidly. Others feel as though everything is changing too fast and that we're losing our way. They become more fearful and more controlling to try and raise their energy. This polarization of fear can be very dangerous because fearful people can rationalize extreme measures. As I was saying all of this, I felt as though I was expanding on what had earlier heard Will says and Williams, but I also had the distinct sensation that it was something I knew all along, but didn't realize I knew until this very moment. I understand that, Curtin said with certainty. That's why these people are so willing to waste this valley. They rationalize that civilization will fall apart in the future, and they won't be safe unless they seize more control. Well, I'm not going to allow it to happen. I'll blow the whole thing sky high. I looked hard at him. What do you mean? Just that I used to be a demolitions expert. I know how. I must have looked alarmed because he said, Don't worry, I'll figure out a way to do it where no one gets hurt. I wouldn't want that on my conscience. A wave of knowledge filled me. Any kind of violence, I said, just makes it worse. Don't you see? What other way is there? Out of the corner of my eye, I glimpsed the form again for an instant, and then it disappeared. I don't know exactly, I said, but if we fight them with anger and hate, they just see an enemy. It makes them more entrenched. They become more fearful. Somehow this group that Williams was talking about is supposed to do something else. We're supposed to fully remember our birth visions, and then we can remember something more, a world vision. Somehow I knew the term, but couldn't remember where I'd heard it before. A world vision? Curtis pondered deep in thought again. I think David Lone Eagle mentioned that. Yes, I said, that's right. What do you think a world vision is? I was about to say I didn't know when a thought came to me. It's an understanding, no, a memory of how we will fulfill human purpose. It brings in another level of love, an energy that can bridge the polarization and end this experiment. I don't see how that's possible, Curtis said. It involves the energy level around people who are in fear. I said, somehow knowing they would be touched, awakened from their preoccupation. They would choose to stop. For several moments we were silent. Then Curtis said, maybe, but how do we bring in this energy? Nothing more came to mind. I wish I knew how far they're prepared to go with this experiment, he added. What causes the hum, I asked. The hum is a linking dissonance between the small generators. It means that they're still trying to calibrate the device. The more grating and disharmonious it is, the more it's out of phase. He thought for another moment. I just wonder which energy vortex they're going to focus on. I suddenly sensed a particular nervousness, not within myself, but outwardly, as if I was around someone else who was anxious. I looked at Curtis, who seemed relatively calm. Beyond the trees, I again saw the vague outlines of her form. It moved as if agitated or frightened. I would imagine, Curtin said absently, that if one were close to the target location, one would hear the hum and then feel a kind of static electricity in the air. We looked at each other, and in the silence I could hear a faint sound, merely a vibration. Do you hear that? Curtis asked, now alarmed. As I looked at him, I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck and forearms. What is this? For an instant, Curtin observed his own arms and looked at me in horror. We've got to get out of here, he screamed, grabbing his flashlight, leaping to his feet, and half dragging me off the crest of the slope. Suddenly, the same ear-shattering roar I'd heard with Will descended again and carried with it a shockwave that knocked both of us to the ground. Simultaneously, the earth beneath us shook violently, and a massive fissure opened 20 feet away, creating an explosion of dust and debris. Behind us, one of the towering oaks, undermined by the shifting earth, leaned and then fell to the ground in a thunderous roar, adding to the noise. Seconds later, another fissure tore open right beside us, and the ground tilted. Curtis, unable to hold on, slid towards the widening abyss. I held onto a small bush and reached out for Curtis's hand. For a moment we held tight, then our grip slipped, and I watched helplessly as he slid over the edge. The fissure moved and widened, spewed another plume of dust and rock, shook once more, and then was still. A limb under the fallen tree cracked loudly, and then the night was again silent. As the dust cleared, I let go of the bush and crawled towards the edge of the massive hole. When I could see, I realized that Curtis was lying prone at the edge, even though I was sure I'd seen him fall in. He rolled towards me and jumped to his feet. Let's go, he yelled. It could start again. Without speaking, we ran down the hill towards the campsite. Curtis ahead, me limping behind. When Curtis reached the site, he seized both tents and ripped them from the ground, stakes dangling, and stuffed them into the packs. I pushed in the other gear, and we continued towards the southwest until the ground flattened into thick underbrush. Another half-mile. Exhaustion and my weakening ankle forced me to stop. Curtis surveyed the terrain. Maybe we'll be safe here, he said, but let's move deeper into the thicket. I followed as he led us 50 feet further into the dense woods. This will do right here, he commented. Let's put up the tents. Within a couple of minutes, both tents were up and covered with limbs, and we were looking at each other breathlessly, sitting on his tent's large entrance flap. What do you think happened? I asked. Curtis's face looked gaunt as he dug his pack for water. They're doing exactly what we thought, he said. They're trying to focus the generator on a remote space. He took a long drink from his canteen. They're going to ruin this valley. These people have to be stopped. What about the smoke we smelled? I don't know what to think, Curtis said. It was as though Dr. Williams was there. I could almost hear his inflection, his tone of voice, what he would have said in that situation. I caught Curtis's eye. I think he was there. Curtis handed me the canteen. How is that possible? I don't know, I said, but I think that he came to convey a message to you. When we saw him during his life review, he was agonizing because he had failed to wake up, to remember why he'd been born. He was convinced that you were supposed to be part of this group, he mentioned. Can't you remember anything about that? I think he wanted you to know that violence won't stop these people. We have to do it another way with this world vision that David talked about. He gave me a blank look. What about when the earth movement started? I asked, and the fissure opened. I know I saw you roll in, yet you were lying at the edge when I got there. He looked totally perplexed. I'm not really sure. I couldn't hold on and was slipping into the hole. As I dropped down, this incredibly peaceful feeling came over me, and I was cushioned, like falling onto a soft mattress. All I could see was the white blur around me. The next thing I knew, I was lying at the side of the fissure again, and you were there. Do you think Dr. Williams could have done that? I don't think so, I said. I had a similar experience yesterday. I was almost crushed by stones, and I saw the same white form. Something else is happening. Curtis stared at me for a moment, then said something else, but I didn't respond. I was drifting into sleep. Let's turn in, he said. Curtis was already up when I climbed out of my tent. The morning was clear, but a ground fog covered the forest floor. Instantly, I knew he was angry. I can't stop thinking about what they're doing, he said, and they aren't going to give up. He took a breath. By now, they've figured out what a mess they've made on the hill. They'll spend some time recalibrating, but not for long, and then they'll try again. I can stop them, but we have to find out where they are. Curtis, violence just makes it worse. Didn't you understand the information coming from Dr. Williams? We have to discover how to use the vision. No, he shouted with deep emotion. I've tried that before. I looked at him. When? His expression changed to confusion. I don't know. Well, I stressed, I think I do. He waved me off with his hand. I don't want to hear it. This is just too crazy. Everything that's happened is my fault. If I haven't worked on this technology, they might not be doing this. I'm going to handle it my way. He walked over and began packing. I hesitated, then started taking down my own tent, trying to think. After a moment, I said, I've already sent for some help. A woman I met, Maya, thinks she can persuade the sheriff's department to investigate this. I want you to promise me you'll give me some time. He was kneeling beside his backpack, checking a bulging side pocket. I can't do that. I may have to act when I can. You have explosives in your pack? He walked towards me. I told you before, I'm not going to hurt anyone. I want some time, I repeated. If I can reach Will again, I think I can find out about this world vision. Okay, he said. I'll give you as long as I can. But if they start experimenting again, and I think I'm out of time, I'll have to do something. As he spoke, I saw Will's face again in my mind's eye, surrounded by a rich emerald colour. Is there another high-energy location near here? I asked. He pointed south. Somewhere up the big ridge, there's a rock overhang I've heard about, but that's private land that was recently sold. I don't know who owns it now. I'm going to look for it. If I can find the right place, then maybe I can locate Will again. Curtis finished packing and helped me tie up my own gear and spread leaves and branches where the tents had been. Towards the northwest, we could hear the faint sound of vehicles. I'm heading east, he said. I nodded as he walked away, then pulled my pack onto my shoulders and started up the rocky slope to the south. I travelled over several small hills and then tackled the steep incline of the main ridge. About halfway up, I began to look through the dense forest for an overhang, but found no sign of an opening. After climbing several hundred more yards, I stopped again. Still no outcropping, and I could see none at the crest of the ridge above. I was confused about which way to go, and decided to sit down and attempt to raise my energy. After a few minutes, I felt better, and was listening to the sounds of birds and trees, frogs and the thick limbs over my head, when a large golden eagle fluttered from its nest and flew east along the top of the ridge. I knew the presence of the bird had meaning, so as with the hawk before, I decided to follow. Gradually the slope became more rocky. I crossed a small spring flowing from the rocks and refilled my canteen and washed my face. Finally, a half-mile further, I pushed my way through the grove of small fir trees, and there before me lay the majestic overhang. Almost half an acre of the slope was covered with huge terraces of thick limestone, and at the furthermost edge, a 20-foot wide shelf jutted out at least 40 feet from the ridge, providing a spectacular view of the valley below. For an instant, I detected a dark emerald highlight around the lower shelf. I took off my pack and pushed it out of sight under a pile of leaves, then walked out and sat on the ledge. As I centered myself, the image of Will came easily to mind. I took one more deep breath and began to move. Hey, that's it for today. Don't forget to check the links down below. Check the links on my channel. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you know when the next video will be uploaded. Take care, and blessed be.